Croeso cynnes iawn at yn seminar dydd Mawrth. Heddiw, ni'n ystyried oes rhaid i ni ail-ystyried y rôl cymdeithas sifil mewn cyd-destun y trychineb y Rohingyas. A very warm welcome to our Tuesday seminar. Today, we're going to consider the question, do civil societies need to revisit their roles in finding a durable and dignified solution to the Rohingya crisis? And I'm really delighted to introduce Dr. Palash Kamruzzaman. Palash is a senior lecturer in social policy in the University of South Wales, and he has diverse research interests, including international development and aid and global poverty and counter-terrorism, and in particular also civil society, as evidenced by his prolific outputs, including last year's excellent book, Civil Society in the Global South, which I thoroughly recommend, published by Routledge. So very much looking forward to today's session. The format is as usual, so Palash will speak for around about half an hour or so, and then we'll have time for a few questions. So as I say, I'm really delighted now to hand over to Palash.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Paul, for your kind words and having me in this seminar. So let me share my slides. So Paul, if you can just confirm that you can see me as well as the slides, is that okay? Yes.
Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, it's all fine, Palash.
Cheers, thank you. Okay. Right, thank you everyone for coming and making time to this lunchtime seminar. I'll be talking here do civil societies need to revisit their roles in finding a durable and dignified solutions for the Rohingya crisis? As Paul was kindly saying that I work on civil society, and currently I lead a British Academy funded project that looks into the dignity of Rohingyas and loss of dignity among Rohingyas, as well as the internally displaced people in Afghanistan. However, this presentation is solely based on my personal reflection, working on Rohingya issues for a few years now. And I'd like to combine the things I have seen and learned. And by being a Bangladeshi citizen and British citizen, having this enormous privilege to see was to be able to keep an eye on both sides of the arguments or situation, helps me able to offer these views. And your views, your comments and suggestions will be immensely helpful to develop this further. So without further ado, I'm going to start by giving you the outline that I'll be talking briefly about the crisis. I mean, assuming that that most of us know what's happening and as the situation. So very brief one. I'll try to give a reflection that I relate my understanding within the mobilizing ability of civil society organizations. And what I argued that despite civil society promises heterogeneity, current focus about the Rohingya crisis seems to be solely on humanitarian support. And I would also argue that this is predominantly led by the international organizations instead of Bangladeshi or local civil society organizations. Yeah, you notice that I'm continuously using the form plural, and I'll explain why. I try to portray the picture that there are tensions brewing within the host community, while there are also frustrations among the national NGOs as well as the government of Bangladesh. So I'll just conclude by preliminary conclusion, of course, what are the current situations, where these current situations will lead in terms of civil society scholarship and humanitarian development. As promised, a very brief, very brief introduction to say that a huge number of Rohingya refugees are living in Bangladesh at this moment in in Bangladeshi camps in Cox's Bazar. Please note that these two countries, Bangladesh and Myanmar, are not in formal conflict whatsoever. So this is a non-conflicting situation, which has made making the camps largest refugee settlement in the world. I'm also aware that the Rohingya refugees are living in many other countries, but if you look at the number of displaced Rohingyas due to the ongoing few decade-long crisis, you would understand that from the UNHCR that almost 90% of displaced Rohingyas are now hosted in Bangladesh. And that's why I say it is Bangladesh represents an important country study, an important country case study to understand the situation and its policy implications. As I said, I'm continuously using plural form of civil societies rather than civil society, because there are simply many different types of civil society: local civil society, national civil society, international, global civil society. And I'd like to see, I'm trying to make them as a broader framework to see what different roles can all these groups play. I'm also aware of the evolution and distinction in terms of theory about the traditional civil society and modern civil society, right? And that has some implications in my reflection, and I'll explain this too, and how this relates to discourse of development and humanitarian development. So before I move on, just please bear in mind that we need to understand Rohingya crisis, that this was not created by Rohingyas themselves, or in this presentation's case, the host community Bangladesh. They are not the creator, originator of this crisis. They are just bearer of this crisis, or one could say victim of this crisis. Also, from my research and from my understanding and talking to several stakeholders and actors who are dealing with this crisis, I think this needs to be very clear from the onset that this is an inherently political crisis. Yes, it has a humanitarian element, which is sole focus at this minute apparently, but in the end, this is a political crisis that deserves and that needs political solution. Humanitarian aid or humanitarian aspect is just one puzzle for the whole picture. So I focus on two personal observations mainly. What I express here and offer in front of you is there is an impasse towards any meaningful progress resolution of the Rohingya crisis, which leads to the growing frustrations and to some extent hostility against the Rohingyas among the host community. Let me explain a little bit more what I mean by an impasse towards any meaningful process resolution of the Rohingya crisis. The crisis from the latest episode of Myanmar violence and oppression, if we take 2017, is now it's in fourth year. And there is no solution at this moment inside, which can be said as a sustainable and dignified solution. The government of Bangladesh thought that this will be a quick thing, it will be over very soon. So they opened their border, welcomed these refugees, but with all their efforts and surprise, I guess, the crisis is being dragged on and on and on. And like I said, even in literature, people are struggling to come up with some solutions. Those one can say, look, these are these solutions, those are acceptable for all the relevant stakeholders. And I mean mainly by Bangladesh, Rohingyas, and Myanmar themselves. It's not there. There are some bits and bobs people are suggesting here and there, not a concrete solution on paper even for before you could talk about in terms of practice. So Bangladesh also tried to achieve something by having a bilateral agreement with Myanmar, and they did produce one bilateral contract for some to a gradual repatriation of the Rohingyas. And until today, same thing, the result is pretty much zero. To the best of my knowledge, no Rohingya, not a single Rohingya, has been able to return to Myanmar as a result of any policies. What also is important to remember, the reason is the backstage ownership of the crisis. The crisis, it seems like the protagonist has become the major donors. They're calling the shots. And we'll explain a little bit later that what I mean by these, the backstage ownership. In terms of growing frustration in host community, I would like to focus on 3 points. For example, local communities feel that Rohingyas have outnumbered them and out-privileging them in their own land. So the understanding of own land, that this is their country, this was their place. And if you look at Cox's Bazar, the number of Rohingyas have totally outnumbered the local population, and the privileges, and I say it should have been within quote, the support they're receiving, similar sort of support are not available to the local community members, right? So this is causing a huge frustration. I've spoken to some, let's say bus drivers and some local, absolutely local farmers, local everyday people. And they were telling me okay, we, before anybody else, we helped these people, we gave them shelter, we gave them food, we rescued them from the boats. And we are the facilities they're having now, and we are not getting any support from anybody, even though we have sheltered them in our home, for example. This is our area. This was our forest where we were having livelihood from. And so there is a frustration, and they feel some Rohingyas, or at least the interaction they make, some Rohingyas now think this is their right to have all these things, and they can talk loudly over many locals. I'm not trying to depict a generalized picture here, but there are some frustrations. Also, there are too much attention to supporting the Rohingyas is causing the tension, because not many people are seeing any Rohingyas leaving or going back to Myanmar. There's no effort in repatriation. So when I was in Rohingya camps last year, so this is a shop on the left-hand side of the picture. This is where all the Rohingyas, what support they receive, the toothpaste, the soaps, and the cosmetics, because they receive too much. And the water purification buckets, they receive too much because these are not needed by them. So from the Rohingyas' perspective, they're receiving too many things, too few things, too many times, and those are becoming surplus. And what will they do with them? So they try to get some cash by selling to the local markets. So this is a shop that sells these surplus elements or supporting hygiene products and other products they receive from the donors, right? The other aspect about this, growing frustration for the Rohingya community could be explained that Rohingyas seem to be posing several risks, and I say this by including what you call the security risk. There is a growing security risk because Rohingyas are migrating in numbers. Rohingyas are migrating in numbers. They're trying to go to different countries by treacherous journeys through boats, through risky ventures. As you see, they're living now in Middle East, in America, in Indonesia, in Malaysia, and other places. So what happens, I predict, and it's not I predict, this is growing. I think this is a growing pattern, that they become become easy target for the human traffickers, and many of them are especially the women are being involved, are being lured for prostituting reasons. And also there are some elements which is which can be seen within the local community, Cox's Bazar, for this this abuse of vulnerable women and prostitution in Cox's Bazar, as well as some are involved in drug dealings, the amphetamine tablets, which is the trade is very large, let's say, without giving you the name, but the local name is Iaba. So they're involved in this peddling, drug peddling, including the 11 years children, which is shocking. And also you may understand that there's also there's a potential risk of some extremist group, that this group of people persecuted, marginalized, discriminated over a long time are in theory and in practice simply out there to be radicalized. And there are some groups active within the border of Myanmar and places like this. And these are the risk, I think, if these evolve further, especially the security risk, I'm sure this will cause a huge security risk, not only for the country, possibly the region. And we might get this kind of picture some Rohingyas, because in the Mediterranean we are still not seeing that Rohingyas are dying, but maybe soon this might happen. I'm sorry to say this, but this looks like the natural course of this crisis if we do not find a quick, speedy, dignified, and sustainable solution. That's my argument, and that's what I have found. And this also shows the Rohingya movement, for example, that this evidence, what I'm trying to say, that so this is from the Daily Star, like I was showing. So this is from this an argument that just vanished. The government tried to suppress this, not acknowledge this. But the issue is this is an investigative report from that Daily Star report. Daily Star is leading Bangladeshi newspaper. And this investigative report was suggesting, if you look at the total number in 2018, is 2020 total number is much, much lower. And that potentially supports what I'm saying, that they're trying to go to other countries, as well as they're spreading within Bangladesh in many different places, even though in theory they should not be able to go outside the camps, right? So this is what is happening, and these are the crises, I think, which leads me to argue that what role civil society can play in coming up with viable and sustainable solutions for this. In explaining this, I'm trying to say that I take this approach that the organizations, those voluntarily want to advance a common interest, right? The organizations between family and state, and in an advanced understanding between the market as well, are part of civil society. And what role civil society could do, that I take among many aspects of civil society, the mobilization ability of this civil society and global civil society. And I am influenced by the arguments of Habermas as well as Richard Jenkins. So Habermas argues that when social politicals and social problems resonate in the private life sphere and distill and transmit such reactions in amplified form to the public sphere, institutionalized problem-solving discourses on questions of general interest inside the framework of organized public sphere. So in other words, when large number of people of a community, a town, a region, state, or even at global level, that's where I come from, the global civil society element, begin to conceive of common needs, truly powerful changes can happen. And I argue that there are other examples, like many theorists have argued. This is where I think civil society can play a massive role in terms of having this common interest, not to persist the ongoing crisis and working towards a common goal such as social justice for the victim groups of this crisis. So this relates to the understanding, to say that the theoretical touch, I'm thinking what informs my understanding, the theoretical information I am influenced by at this case, is that Scholte argues that these are considered to be part of civil society when they involved a deliberate attempt from outside the state and market, and in one or other organized fashion to shape policies, right, norms and deeper social structure. So moving on is this is what he says: civil society refers to a political space where voluntary associations deliberately seek to shape the rules that govern one or the other aspect of social life. And my final statement about the theoretical the way I have been theoretically informed, or I have shaped my presentation in a theoretically informed manner, is that civil society can also play a crucial watchdog function by holding the government, and in this case, by holding different actors accountable to the people, to the Rohingyas, to the vulnerable group. So I question what is happening regarding the Rohingya crisis in Bangladesh, right? Initially, it can be perceived, at least it is apparent, that Bangladesh has taken the lead to coordinate its efforts by involving different ministries. Among others, the three ministries are heavily involved: Ministry of Disaster Management and Relief, Ministry of Home Affairs, and Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And the government has also established a Refugee Relief and Repatriation Commissioner's Office, and also involved national security forces for security matters and many other matters. So this might be this might give a picture that okay, Bangladesh is leading this effort, and Bangladesh is has taken the ownership of the crisis, or the what they say, liability. However, although this seems to be the case on paper, what I understand from my work and from watching this crisis over the years, that Bangladesh has very little to say when it comes to producing a durable and dignified solution of the crisis. And as I said, this is visible because no one has been able to repatriate. There's no formal mechanism, and there's for future repatriation in near future. And also there is no solution inside, or there is no mechanism in place that will force Myanmar or other places or other countries to bring in a common platform to say, look, we are looking at this seriously and we'll be dealing with this. This is also visible in the recent donor conference about the sustained humanitarian support for the Rohingyas, and I'm going to explain a little bit more later. And I know that I'm saying that Bangladesh's apparent not so important role is a contested phrasing. The government, other representatives might not argue with this, but like I said, this is about when it comes to policy solutions. to be able to produce, leverage, or to direct a solution. That's where Bangladesh has very weak bargaining power, and this is not this is not the case that they're able to take a firm stance about the rehabilitation, relocation of the Rohingyas for the remote island in Bhasanchar. As you can see, even the Bangladesh wants to send them, even the Bangladesh wants to say look, we want this solution very soon. Nobody seems to be listening, and that's my position in terms of this case of their policy position about the weakness in terms of Rohingya repatriation for a strong position in this case. As I was saying, the example can be seen from the recent sustaining support for the Rohingya Refugee Response Conference that was organized in October, 22nd of October. The conference was organized by the United States, United Kingdom, EU, and the UNHCR. I have watched the conference. It was live streamed, and it was quite extraordinary to see that the Bangladeshi foreign minister, Bangladeshi state minister for foreign affairs, was saying, look, please, can you relieve us from this burden by ensuring the repatriation of the Rohingyas. We do not need, and that's what I emphasize, we do not need aid or humanitarian support, because aid will keep them here in this country for a few more years at least. And if you see, totally sidelined, totally ignored, everybody, the rest of the participants, were acknowledging the generous gesture from the Bangladesh government for hosting these people, and they were ignoring Bangladesh's pledge and stance that they want repatriation. They were pouring dollars after dollars, millions and millions of dollars in the name of humanitarian aid and support, right? And that will keep them in Bangladesh. And there is a huge outcry among many stakeholders. I'll explain this too. The knowledge base, the picture, the knowledge base also is not created by Bangladesh at all. All these reports are by WFP, IOM, UNICEF, UNHCR, and other international organizations. So the knowledge base is also a signifier to say that Bangladesh is not in the position of coming up ownership of this crisis, because policy solutions, especially what you say in the academia, evidence-based policies, are made of this knowledge base. So when this knowledge base is available from the international organizations, namely part of international civil society, this will simply serve the agenda that these people have, or this group of civil society have, not the position of the Bangladeshi community, Bangladeshi people, or Bangladeshi civil society. What I'm trying to say, do I say look, is something is not useful? So I'm trying to say it is useful. Bangladeshi, the international organizations, they stepped in for humanitarian support, and Bangladesh allowed the access. And if you have this experience of working in Bangladesh among the Rohingyas, and the RRC, like I was saying, they play a massive role in terms of giving permission and allowing some people, some operations to take place. So on that note, they control things. So now that these people are here, they have allowed these people for sustained humanitarian support to keep this vulnerable, victimized group of Rohingyas alive. But in terms of policy negotiations, and regional level donors have overshadowed the role of Bangladesh in its various arms. The reason I say this, because all the national level events I am aware of, I have been there, or I have seen, or I have followed, I have seen, and I continue to see, that the international members of the international organizations are playing the instrumental roles. It seems like Bangladeshi representatives are there for ceremonial reason, because without Bangladesh, you cannot just have a proper seminar or conference event on Rohingya crisis and its solution or some other form. What I have seen, the major players are the UN people, or different bodies of UN subject to the type of the event, and also the missions, representatives from the diplomatic missions in Bangladesh. Again, the member states, donor country members, or donor country ambassadors, say, for example, more precisely. Notably, what I have also observed is not every country or most countries, the geopolitics is clear in this crisis. Mostly the people who play instrumental role, or people, the journalists, are there to listen to the views from the representatives of the United States, United Kingdom, European Union, and to some extent, largely India as well. I must not say that this is the case. And this, again, I say, this is very much like what happened in the recent donor crisis. the Bangladeshi representative is there, but nobody's listening to them. People are more focused, more concentrated. They know that these people will play major role or more important role than the Bangladeshi people themselves. It is also visible in terms of like the national media, as well as like national civil society organizations, namely NGOs. I must give my note that I do not think NGOs are the sole elements of the national civil society. And that's what I said, like I'm aware of the division between traditional civil society and modern civil society. But here, just to focus that, what happens in terms of the national NGOs. So in recent conferences, these are like quite visible to show like, look, this guy from like, the co-chair of CCNF is saying that UN agencies and donor agencies signed a grand bargain to have this commitment about like, using these NGO people in the cheap price. So this one is also like, trying to say like, it is the case that, there is a huge confusion about the financing among the people, because we do not know, like, there seems to be a lot of money available for the supporting of the Rohingyas, but there is this doubt that, we do not see that these funds are available directly to the national NGOs, let alone it goes directly to the like, Rohingya people themselves or the local community. I must say there are some, not significant, some support mechanisms available to support the local community too. This frustration can be also visible here when you see, like, in a national conference, 700 NGOs. The number is staggering, right? In one country, the meeting are trying to tell that they need to play like a massive, more active role. They were asking the UN and other people, other like UN organizations, to treat local NGOs as equal partner. And that for me shows that, look, the partnership is not equal. And that supports my argument that the centrality, the donors are at the center of this crisis. And it's also, you see from the frustration, this is Momen. Abdul Momen is the foreign minister himself. And he was blaming in national media that international agencies, NGOs, are hindering the Rohingya relocation to the Vashancho. So Bangladesh has created, again with the donor support, a massive location, remote island, I must say, remote island, but it has, given some infrastructure. It has upgraded, like, this infrastructure on paper, by the look of it, much better than the, like, the Rohingya, congested Rohingya camps. But they cannot take the refugees there for various reasons. And the foreign minister is blaming the international agencies and NGOs to support what I'm trying to say, that Bangladesh does not control the, like, have the, like, complete ownership of the crisis. The donor visibility, I'm not bashing them. I'm just trying to say, like, who is in control to support this, and to come to my point that where the focus lies. The donor visibility is also remarkable in the field, right? Yes, I have seen, like, the Bangladeshi officers, for example, the camp in charges, some Bangladeshi project officers, they're driving in possibly like flashy cars. But allow me to say that the donor cars are flooding the camps. And these are the pictures of, like, these are the two pictures I have taken by myself from the, like, what you call the airport of the Cox's Bazar airport. And all of these cars, as you can see, like, this was not the case before the Rohingya crisis, I can tell. The airport was pretty much like, pretty much least functional apart from the highest time of tourism, because Cox's Bazar is the, like, have this, like, largest sea beach in the world. So there is a tourism season, but apart from that time, this was not the, like, case regularly. And this is actually in the camps, and you can see, like, these cars from this, like, international national staff or donor presence. I'll be taking my hands up and to say, like, yes, when I was there, for many different reasons, including security reasons of a British university and the assistant I had, I stayed in a good hotel, possibly it was 4-star, 5-star, I do not know. But the hotel I was staying, as you can see, this was the notice board of that hotel, and dominated, bombarded by the agenda, meetings, seminars of UNICEF, UNHCR, UN Women, UNHCR, and NRC. Again, just to understand, just to give my, give the, like, support the arguments I'm saying, who is, like, in the like, running the show. So what I'm trying to argue, am I trying to say, like, this support is not important and this is not, like, they're not playing an important role? Very clearly, that's not my argument. I'm trying to say it is very important to maintain humanitarian assistance, because otherwise these vulnerable people will simply die. It is quite impossible. They will spread out. They will just, like, cause huge anarchy, I guess. it is important. I cannot emphasize enough that how important to maintain humanitarian assistance is. But my sole key argument, one of the key arguments is that my attention is that crisis is solely reliant on humanitarian element. That's not the key thing. Like I said, the crisis demand something beyond humanitarian support. So international civil society are focusing on humanitarian assistance, but what could happen if the crisis protracts for a significant time? Like I was saying, there is a growing frustration among the host community. What happens if the host community explode? The frustration becomes something else, right? And I get what I mean by this is if you look at what is happening elsewhere, and one example is the recent example in Lesbos, where the Moria camps were torched. Fire. There was huge fire in Moria camps in Greece, Lesbos, Greece. So this is I have taken this picture from a video of an amateur refugee who was trying to show, look, it's not this that the refugees themselves have burned down their own places. It's not that the fire was accidental. They were blaming that the local far-right activists actually caused the fire. And I just fear if something like this happens in Bangladesh, this will be a catastrophe. And this is an example that when the Rohingyas, large number of Rohingyas were gathering for the second anniversary of their arrival in Bangladesh, I mean, I know for the fact that these are the people we understand in our study. They are praying, you see, they're praying to God that thank you, that we are alive. They were saying thank you to Bangladesh government for giving them the shelter. But the local media portrayed this as a possible tension, as if they were organizing themselves to do something against Bangladesh government or Bangladeshi local administration. And that's the thing I'm saying, all these elements have the ingredients are there, maybe not in the right elements or right measure, but this might lead to a huge catastrophe if there is a conflict between, there is a conflict at this moment in terms of tension, but if it becomes more severe, this might be a much worse than what we have now. So what do I understand? That civil society, my analysis and my arguments, the civil society does not need only to play the humanitarian supporting role. And for local NGOs, they are becoming as a service delivery organizations, as a branch, as a contractor for the international NGOs by delivering different projects, those are set by international NGOs and international civil society. I see civil society can play a bigger role than this. Like I was saying, the way I am theoretically informed this presentation, the mobilization agenda, shaping the policy agenda, and making policies happen. So based on the mobilizing ability of the civil society, I think international organizations as well as national, including the traditional civil societies, because I would like to emphasize these are the people, the traditional civil society was there before anybody else when crisis broke out. They gave them the shelter, they helped these people to get out of the trauma, and they gave food. And there was nationwide, some of us might remember, there was a festive kind of atmosphere. People from Dhaka, people from other places, they were collecting donor support or small charities, and they were going by truck in a festive mood to support the Rohingyas. But that is now turning into some form of hostility against these people. And that is the civil society is combining international and national, and including the traditional civil societies. I argue, they are able and they should play a more proactive role in finding, investigating, and offering cognate policy solutions in resolving this crisis, let alone just solely focus on humanitarian element of the crisis. And this could be in terms of evidence-based policymaking. This could be based on the first-hand experience of working at the front line. We could learn from them, and these people could actually help shaping the policy agendas, the field data, and their participating experience in various national and international forums. In addition to the continued humanitarian support, I think civil society should therefore play a strong advocacy role to resolve this crisis. The reason I say this is because failure to find a dignified and sustainable solution of this crisis might have a severe implication for future humanitarian development as well as civil society. Because if this goes on and Bangladesh pay a massive price the way I'm trying to portray, I would think, and what is happening in Syria, in Turkey, and other places, I think next time there is like a humanitarian crisis about the vulnerable refugees, I think other countries will think twice before they open up their borders to help support vulnerable refugees who might otherwise face death. Civil society itself as a scholarship will be in danger because they might be just labeled for opportunist, because they're opportunists in this sense. They're just focusing solely on the easy bit, humanitarian support, and just doing the service delivery element, rather than to truly show their ability to shape the agenda of policymaking and help mobilizing more people and making the other different stakeholders in a table, in a common forum where policies are negotiated and produced. I also sense that this would also fuel some degree of populism. And we can see this populism in many parts of the right-wing populism in many parts of the Europe, and the hatred towards refugees are quite extraordinary. And the stronger role from civil society in making meaningful contribution towards dignified solution of this crisis will probably that can actually stop from happen in Bangladesh. So I should stop there, and I'd like to say thank you for coming. And I'd like to also say thank you to Ian, Paul, and Chloe for their support for me to be able to come here and talk about this. I'm thinking of making this as a bigger proposal for a research study. And on that note, it would be very helpful if we have any question or even any comments and feedback. If not in this presentation, this event, you can always get in touch and send me some of your feedback, comments. I'll be very grateful. Thank you.
Excellent. Many thanks, Palash. That's excellent. Some really interesting points there, and we've been working up some ideas to take this forward. We've got a little time now for some questions. So using the participants tab, if you've got a question, that'd be great. If you could just raise a little blue hand, and we can then take some questions. Whilst perhaps you're thinking of that, maybe I can just ask Palash, ask you a quick question. Would you agree that one of the core problems is a failure of governance, the failure of the UN and the Bangladeshi government and others to create structures of governance, to have a dialogue and to ask what indigenous local people think and what the Rohingyas themselves think? They're largely overlooked in terms of the way in which dialogue and policy solutions are put forward. And linked to that, I guess a big headache is the fact that the Bangladeshi government is very nervous about a political role for civil society. It's been quite repressive in some of the legislation it's put forward. How would you respond to those propositions, Palash?
I mean, it's I mainly agree in a sense that there is this failure of creating dialogues between the government, indigenous people, and indigenous civil society, as well as international community. It is true, but I also think I would question, to add to your concern, whether there's a will for that. Everybody seems so busy. The situation, the enormity of the crisis is so huge. Everybody seems to be so busy on securing the resources. There is a competition for resources from different groups, which must be recognized at this stage, and also the distribution. So it has made some winners, the international organizations, their officers, and some local officers as well, local researchers. I don't think there is a will to do that, because doing that, as you said, this will probably bring more danger in terms of politicizing the role of exploring the political role, at least the political advocacy, which government may or may not want. The question is, the government may want, I would assume they want in this crisis, because they, in my view, really want this crisis to be resolved. But there is a huge agenda. There is a problem to this, as you said. The geopolitics, the silence, apparent silence from India, right? If you look at the narratives from Indian media, right, the Rohingyas are not wanted here. They're the what do you call, time bomb of human population growth and all these things, and apparent silence also from China and Russia, maybe so China and India, you see, they pay lip service in some forums. Yes, we want this to be solved, but not strong enough, and Russia is completely silent. So Bangladesh's political position is probably not that strong, and that's what I mentioned about bargaining power, that we need to also consider the bargaining power. Bangladesh do not seem to have that bargaining power to say, look, why don't we allow the civil society to have a political advocacy role and come up with some evidence-based policy suggestions? If the intention was there, like I was showing, does the government of Bangladesh not know that evidence-based policy should come from sound knowledge-based research? Bangladesh seem to have no research ongoing about how they could say, look, this is how we have produced our policy solutions, and based on this fact. The academics there seem to be quite reluctant to engage in this kind of stuff, academic strong research. They're happy to be hired as consultants. So I would also add, so I'm not denying or rejecting anything, refusing, I'm just adding to your concern that there's a lack of will, and this also related to the ability of bargaining power as well as the geopolitics there and the will of the government.
Thanks, Palash. That's great. Just casting around to see if anybody's got a question. Ian, thank you.
Sorry, forgot to unmute. Thank you so much, Palash. That was a really interesting talk. I really appreciate you coming today to give it. Some of your comments set me in mind of Angus Dayton's work. As you know, he's been highly critical of development funding, not opposed to development funding per se, but very critical of funding that replaces or crowds out government responsibility. And I just wonder whether in this case, and maybe also in the parallels with the Greek islands, whether that argument doesn't hold because there isn't this geopolitical motivation towards getting a solution. I just wonder whether you had some thoughts on that.
It is quite difficult to come up with a generic answer here, and as you know, different context will play out differently. So Greece is a part of European Union, and they receive fund from through different state and European mechanisms to deal with this crisis. I'm just struggling to use these phrases, that dealing with this crisis, but to manage this crisis, to have this crisis, right? And then if you look at Turkey, for example, every time Mr. Erdogan will be in some sort of within quote trouble, and he will be within quote threatening the European Union, I'm going to open my door so that the Syrian refugees can go to many other places, especially in Europe, and then they will pose the security risk or whatsoever, I don't care. The understanding for Bangladesh is different in this case. It is not one of those what you call the high-income countries. So donors have historically played a massive role in terms of various development policies, including many national state policies through the backstage donorship, as I was explaining in my presentation. So the money talks in a sense. I know that there's also what you call the suspicion among many government actors themselves and some parts of an international community. And I have heard this by myself, people are saying, look, Bangladesh does not want this to be resolved because Bangladesh is getting huge amount of aid. And then again, the rhetorics, at least I would say the rhetorics, exchange of rhetorics, I have heard by myself when I was next to the foreign minister, and foreign minister will be saying, look, why don't other countries take these refugees and we'll give 5 times as much as you are giving us? Because the cost is not this. The conference has generated $600 million, meaning that if you just do the simple math, that $600 for every refugee, $600 will not probably take far for these refugees to keep them for a good few years, right? So Bangladesh will also have to pay through the ecology, through the environment, through the the local tensions and many other ways. So that's where I think the dilemma is we do not have a knowledge base the objective research, the showing the evidence I was showing for the conferences, and I have my friends here, I guess from international sector in intersectoral coordination group that coordinates the Rohingya operation. If you look at the knowledge base, they have what you call open sources, all the reports, at least majority of the reports on Rohingyas, many studies. I have not found one study, either by the Bangladeshi colleagues or Bangladeshi scholars, which was like a research project funded by Bangladeshi government, or any Bangladeshi government study there. So what sort of this is evident in terms of hegemony. When you have this knowledge base, hegemonically speaking, the evidence-based policy will look into these policies, these evidences. And that's why I think dilemma lies in terms of development, civil society. And that's what I was saying, from traditional to modern civil society, because modern civil society, namely in the organization of the NGOs, because this is the manufactured version of civil society, theoretically speaking, we have manufactured a particular type of civil society that we can dictate, we can manipulate, and we can tell them what to do. And they also have limited options in that case, because they receive money from the donors and they have to play whatever they have been told.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Palash. Just seeing if there are any other questions for Palash. Palash, I was wondering, in terms of the solution, and in the face of kind of serial policy failure that we have in the crisis, I guess there's a key word that keeps coming into my mind, which is the notion of trust. And trust often maps onto transparency and accountability. This is a big question, so forgive me, but what are your thoughts on perhaps the way forward in terms of trying to build trust with all the different parties and tiers of governance to try and find a solution? Where does trust lie within all of this?
I mean, trust is an extraordinarily important element of this case, and that's why I think the two major parties, or at least three major parties, none of them trust each other, namely Rohingya communities, Bangladesh government, and Myanmar. And Myanmar's position, I think this will take a huge global operation, because as much as I say look, this will be solved in this and this way, third-party mediation, for example, India and China brokering a policy, it will probably do not last that long or make significant impact. It may still do, but I would have my doubts for that. If you look at what is happening in terms of Myanmar's position, and I think that's where I think it is also important that other regional politics and international community, let's say, including the regional community, they need to play their part. Because I know that I do my research in academia, but I'm also a citizen of society. I'm a member of society. And if I go to a pub and and if I buy you a beer and buy myself a Coke, and I'll be saying, if I ask anybody a question, why the powerful will give up their power? What will make them to do that, right? So Myanmar in a position that the party in power, because of this anti-hate Rohingya hatred policy, there is no pressure from any international community to make Myanmar bow down to the pressure to take the Rohingyas back. And that's where I understand why they will even show that, look, I'm part of this process. They are playing possum. They're playing the what you call the double standard. And if you look at the international community, all these business as usual approaches ongoing. The trade relations, the trade amount of trade with Myanmar from majority of the Western countries are increasing day by day. And notable example will be Canada, because Canada want to join the international criminal justice for the with Gambia. So when your trade is growing month after month, year after year, and you think everybody's actually patting my back while they're just saying some bad words, some harsh words in in the United Nations or something, or major international forums. Also, if you look at the role of Islamic organization OIC, where are they? They should have been at the forefront, because these people are vulnerable. Like I said in many other forums, I do not see the fault of Rohingyas, what they have done to be in this position. It could be their ethnic identity, their religious belief, the belief they have that they're Muslim, right? And OIC should have played a massive role. Where are they again? Nowhere. Malaysia seems to have some strong voice. Indonesia also taking refugees. But just this week, they have been signed a contract with Myanmar, the regional comprehensive economic plan, the largest economic plan on the planet. If I was in that position, I would be asking in a pub, why should I do this then? And that's where I think our question lies, the problem lies in terms of trust.
Thanks, Palash. That's really interesting. There's a huge raft of issues that need to be grappled with, and I know that we're working together, and we'll start to address some of these, hopefully. We're running out of time. Just seeing if there's any other last quick questions. Okay. Before we finish, just to highlight, next week we have another seminar on the 24th, and it's going to be presented by Rachel Stratham from IPPR Scotland, and Rachel's going to be looking at the impact of COVID-19 on financial security in Scotland. So I just flag that up. But really what remains for me to do is to say thank you to everybody for participating, and really in particular to say to Palash, thank you very much for a really interesting seminar, really stimulating. And I look forward to working with you and other colleagues, and we can take some of these ideas forward. But for today, thank you very much for an excellent seminar, Palash. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, goodbye, everybody. Thank you.